Have you ever wanted to play chess but just thought it was a little too slow paced for your liking? What if we took the game of chess and threw it into another genre? Let's see, what other genres do we got here? No, not that one. Oh, here we go. This one looks pretty good. Yeah, that should work. The game we'll be making is a reimagining of the first game I ever made back in high school. I was tasked with making a simple high score style game and came up with the following. Playing as Mega Man, you move around a chessboard dodging incoming fireballs. The main catch was you have limited moves, so optimizing movement was pivotal. There was also some simple power-ups, one that increased your move speed, one that granted you more moves, and one that would either speed up or slow down the fireballs. When thinking of a way to reimagine it, I decided to lean into the direction of chess since this was the playing field for the game. So what if we swapped out Mega Man for a king and fireballs for rooks? With that, I had my idea and a chess-themed bullet hell game was born. It is usually a bad idea to start your game dev projects by making too many finalized assets, as you would probably want to make a more bare bones prototype first to ensure the game concept is actually good and, well, fun. But I was pretty confident and started with art anyway. My first iteration of my king and rook was pretty bad though, so I decided to take some inspiration from online. I found this neat looking asset pack on itch that was free and even allowed their files to be modified, so I used their work as a base but simplified the sprites as less detailed versions would make the next step a lot easier. Let's talk about customization. I knew I wanted to have something similar to Downwell's palette swap system but on a smaller scale. Giving costumes for the king to wear and letting the player pick a favorite sounded like one avenue for having things to work towards and encouraging replayability. So for now, I made a couple variants and even made a Mega Man inspired skin to give homage to the original concept. Swapping over to Godot, we can begin our work on the first of 4 pillars my game has to offer, which is the gameplay. The gameplay consists of the board, the player, the enemy, and the power-ups. The board is needed so everything can have an area to move around in. But instead of just making a sprite that encompasses the entire board, I decided to just make a single tile. This tile can change colors and with a simple function can be duplicated and placed in certain positions. Doing it this way allows for me to have more control over the board, like having the entire board be one color, or more importantly, having different size boards. More on that later. For the player, we can code up some tile-based movement script and give him a raycast to determine if a tile exists for the player to move on. I did try to implement diagonal movement at first, but eventually decided against it. The main reason being it went against some metagame ideology. In a game about dodging with limited moves, diagonal movement would almost always be the preferred option since it's like moving 2 spaces for 1 movement cost. Now that our player is moving, we can add some game feel. This refers to giving the player some sort of feedback for the actions, like a screen shake or a red flash that might appear when you're being attacked, or in our case, an animation and sound effects that plays when we move. For sound effects, I used this website to try and create them myself, but mostly relied on matching the random button and then mutating when I found a decent sound. Making a good enemy often comes with iteration. I started by having a rook appear at random spawn locations and moving in a single direction until they went off screen, but this can be kind of boring. So to make it a bit more exciting, I gave the rook a range of values that they can move, and every couple seconds they will pick a number and move that many tiles. To ensure there is a consistent move speed, we can use tweens. Tweens are used to have one variable of an object move at a constant rate from point A to point B. This looks a lot better, but it can feel a bit unfair as there's no way to know how many tiles each rook is about to move. I fixed this using an indicator system, where the rook will wind up by showing the amount of spaces it will move and then execute. One last technique we can utilize when adding some game feel to our rook is pitch shifting. Often when there is a sound that we played lots of times over a game session, we can add some slight randomness to the pitch of the sound effect to make it sound more digestible to the player. And with that, we are left with a very respectable enemy. The last piece of the puzzle are the power-ups. After making the art for each of the items, I started by implementing the boot, which increases player move speed. Once I was able to get them to spawn properly, which took quite a while, I added some game feel and gave them an expiration timer. Being available only for a limited time will create more split-second decisions, while also keeping the board from getting too overcrowded. Now that I had stats I needed to track, it only made sense to make my HUD. I wanted the game to lean into an arcade machine aesthetic, having HUD elements hug the top and bottom of your screen with minimal wording, akin to some older games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. I picked out a public domain font using this website and laid out all the numbers I wanted to track. I did consider adding a life system to go in the empty spot we have in our HUD, but ultimately decided against it just to keep it simple. Our other 2 power-ups would be the cross and the yin-yang symbol. The cross grants more moves to the player and is essential to keeping your run going, while the yin-yang offers a more strategic complexity by either increasing the rook's move speed so there are less enemies to deal with on screen, or decreasing it so you can maximize your reaction time for each encounter. Lastly, a coin system wasn't in the original concept, but it would go in tandem with the color variants I made earlier. I had them spawn separately from power-ups and appear slightly more often, as I felt players might want to farm coins for costumes. Fortunately, a lot of the functionality was similar to a power-up, except when we got a game over. Here we would have to use an autoloader, which basically helps store information that can be shared between different scenes. For example, it'll tell the game how much HP the player has when they move into a new area, or what side quests a player has completed in an RPG. For now, we will be using our autoloader to keep count of how many coins we currently have. And that completes our main gameplay loop, so now I can work on other things like a main menu. As stated before, I'm going for an arcadey vibe, so I thought it might be fun if the main menu looked like an arcade machine. After throwing together something I was satisfied with, I made some buttons that would be used throughout the project for various things. I gave them symbols to invoke certain meanings, but it was a bit tricky with such a small canvas size. One last thing I added to sell the arcade aesthetic was a shader. Shaders are kind of like adding a filter to a photo. They can alter the current graphics on screen to your liking. My goal was to add a CRT shader that would warp the screen to appear more curved, give off horizontal scan lines, and have a vignette to make the corners darker. The end result came out quite nice after some help from YouTube, and not to worry, it will be completely optional for those who prefer not to use it. The rest of the pillars from my game can be represented on this main menu. So with gameplay being done, let's move on to our shop system. Before beginning work on a storefront for all the costumes you can buy, I should probably make a bit more options. I went back to Aseprite to craft some fun ideas given by my friends, like this royalty one that I spent way too long trying to get the crown to look right, and even a Tetris themed one once I noticed that it would be possible to get a perfect fit inside my King's base model. I ended up with 20 different costumes that range from color swaps to simple designs, and even some that with more detailed work. In order to keep things as modular as possible for our shop, I made an object that allows me to input the basic information for each costume, like the price, the name, texture, and the status. For showing off these objects, I decided to go with a UI similar to Echoes of Wisdom. I know it catches a lot of flack for being very poorly done, but mine will not be obstructing gameplay, and it'll only contain 20 objects as opposed to Zelda's 120 plus echoes. Once I get the scrolling to work, I add some more game feel like sound effects and a flavor text when you try to make purchases, and finish it up by updating the autoloader with some data related to the costumes we currently own. And with that, the shop menu is complete. Completing the gameplay pillar first was definitely done on purpose, as lots of elements for other parts of our game heavily rely on communicating with the gameplay, as is the case for our stat menu. Usually, following a game over on an arcade machine will prompt the player to enter a name for the score they obtained. The navigation for these moments can feel a bit dated at this point, so I opted for a more modern version recreating this in my game. A menu will fade in to type your name and show some options via buttons that will not be active until some text is typed. Now all we need to do is have our autoloader store the values for the score and the name in two arrays. We can insert new scores using a binary search to determine the index that should be inserted at, then use the same index when inserting the name of the scorer for the other array. Finally, we can swap over to our actual stat menu and start displaying this information. Getting the information to display with correct formatting was a breeze, and I even added some more game feel by having the score information look like it's being loaded in. You might notice there's a lot of extra space at the bottom, and that's because I also wanted to include achievements in my game. It's yet another layer of objectives to work towards and creates player goals. I came up with 10 different achievements that involved almost everything in the game you could interact with, and went to work making some art for them. When it was time to implement them, I made sure to employ the same system as my costumes, making an object with basic information that could be inserted to make it more modular. Once they were all inserted, I went through each one and added checks throughout the game for completing them, so their textures would update. I then set up a text box to appear when you hover over them to let you know how to unlock it, although some of them will just not tell you, so you could say they are a secret to everybody. And now we have a pretty decent stat menu. Accessibility and customization is often overlooked, yet super important to tailoring your game to different types of gamers. So having a decent options menu can sometimes make or break player retention. The settings menu is going to serve a couple different services for my game. I needed to act as a stepping stone for new players, a place to customize your gameplay, and somewhere to change features that may have a subjective enjoyment. To start with the first bullet point, I noticed that some playtesters were sometimes unaware of the effect given off by the Yin Yang power-up. Thus, I created icons for each of the collectibles in the game that could help explain their purpose and created them using a very similar system to the achievements. This modular code is definitely being put to good use. For customizing your playstyle, I thought it might be fun to be able to change your board size, as it was a perplexing idea all the way back when I first coded the tiles. It would further improve the game's depth and allow for different playstyles. Should I use a small board to farm quick upgrades but be punished with less spaces to move on to, or should I use a big board to give myself more movement options but decrease the chances of items being spawned near me? I thought it would be a great addition, so after some algorithm edits to the tile generating function and some tweaks to the enemy spawn locations, you can now play on different sized boards. Sometimes you need to accept that certain design choices for your game may not resonate with everyone, so having the ability to alter them can be good for allowing people to play the way they want to play. With this in mind, I decided to add volume controls following this video that explains audio buses really well for both the music that I will get to eventually and sound effects to play throughout the game. Additionally, I went ahead and added a checkbox to toggle the CRT shader, so with that, our settings menu is now complete, for now. With the main game seemingly done, let's look at how we can improve the small things in different areas. There was a bug with the gameplay that caused items to stay on screen even after being collected, so I fixed that. It seemed annoying to scroll from 1 to 20 on the shop menu, so I added a wrap back to both sides after getting to either end. And some playtesters stated that there need to be more incentive for going towards coins and power-ups that weren't the cross, so now they all give 2 more moves in addition to their stat changes. Now let's talk about saving. Saving your progress between playthroughs is vital to a game like this. There is a lot of data that is important to hold on to, such as the amount of coins I've collected, the high scores I've obtained, the achievements I've unlocked, and much more. With that in mind, creating a save file is not too complicated and can be done in a variety of ways. This video goes into great detail on the different methodologies you can use, such as JSON files or Godot resources. However, I've decided to use a dictionary for all the data I want to store. With some simple save and load functions, we can save our progress anytime we're about to swap scenes and load our progress on the initial boot up. Remember when I said we would get back to music eventually? Well, it's time. I could have gone the easy route and found some public domain tracks online, but I wanted to attempt to make some simple jingles myself. I loaded up the music lab and got to working on some tracks. One for the gameplay that sounded royal and chess-like, and one for the main menu that was more retro and calming. After getting sounds I was pretty satisfied with, I threw them into the game and we had music. So the project was finally done. Although it did feel like something was missing, I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. You can't make a chess game without all the chess pieces, can you? So one final addition I wanted to make for the game was the other pieces. I started with a pawn as it was almost a carbon copy of the rook, but only being able to move one tile at a time. The bishop was a little bit more tricky, as constantly moving in one diagonal direction meant you would be useless most of the time, so after every move I would flip the direction to make it more formidable foe to deal with. The knight was treated like a rook that had 2 queens to finish before their move ended, and would also flip the direction to keep them on the board longer. However, the queen truly proved to be the most problematic and eventually led to a much simpler process for flipping directions. At first, I had separate indicators for each direction and would need a more complicated function to show the correct ones. But I soon realized that changing the sign on the scale of our indicators would have the same effect, making it way easier to handle them. I also utilized a function for the queen to randomly flip directions after every move, as they could decide to move straight instead, leading to very unpredictable patterns. With all the pieces working properly, I added checkboxes in the settings menu so you could toggle any of the pieces on or off to let you figure out the best strategy for yourself. And just like that, King's Gambit was complete.
Please take a look.
Thank you all so much for watching. This project was really fun to work on, and since release I've had multiple people test out the game and even had one of my friends try it out on their stream. If you want to try out King's Gambit, it is available to play for free on my itch.io page, link in the description, as well as any of the resources I used to make this game. On the page you will also find a place to report any bugs you may come across or just any quality of life or ideas you'd like to see. And if there are some major ones, I'll probably try to release a patch. I appreciate the support on this video. I know it's not a Zelda related one, but game development is also something I'm extremely passionate about and I wanted to make a video on. Not to worry though, as more Zelda videos are on the way. So with that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.